What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Just saw the passing, news reports of the passing of another notable uh, personality from my youth, which is yet another reminder that my youth is long gone. Successful national talk show host Phil Donahue, who entertained, challenged, and informed two generations of daytime television viewers, passed away last night following a long illness. His family told the Today Show he was 88 years old. He returned 89 on December 21st. The pioneering The Phil Donahue Show was picked up for national syndication back in 1969 and was redubbed Donahue 5 years later and eventually reached more than 200 stations across the country. It ran until the mid-1990s when the daytime talk show landscape became so saturated and had reduced itself into a tabloid circus, and competitors like Oprah Winfrey and Sally Jesse Raphael, Jenny Jones, and many others had drawn away many of his female viewership, who pretty much made up a lot of the component of daytime, especially morning TV talk show landscape and viewership. While Donahue could talk about very controversial and radical topics, his show was still rather tame compared to the likes of, as I mentioned, Sally Jesse Raphael and Jerry Springer. In all, Donahue received 9 daytime Emmys and 21 nominations, as well as a primetime Emmy for his special Donahue and Kids. Donahue's non-threatening paternal image was key to his appeal, as was his rapport with the women in his studio audience. Another factor was his penetrating interviewing style, which was forceful without being belligerent. Over the years, he interviewed heads of state, politicians, feminist Ku Klux Klan members, porn stars, and 60s radicals. He was the only talk show host to land South Africa's Nelson Mandela right after his release from prison. So contentious was this program that Newsweek once wrote, quote, "One sometimes suspects that Donahue's idea of the perfect guest is an interracial lesbian couple who've had a child by artificial insemination." And in fact, such a couple appeared on his show in 1979. During this time, Donahue became very, very wealthy, being the granddaddy of the modern talk show format. According to Variety, at one point, he was pulling down $20 million a year in salary, multimedia stock, and other options by the mid-1990s. Keep in mind, this is the 90s, and he was making $20 million a year. He was born Philip John Donahue in Cleveland, Ohio on December 21st, 1935. After his junior year at Notre Dame, where he majored in business, Donahue took a summer job at WNDU, the university-owned local station, working his way up to announcer. After graduating with a BBA, he started as a summer replacement announcer for KYW-AM-TV, a television and radio outlet in Cleveland, and left only to return shortly thereafter, unhappy with his job and unable to break into full-time television. In the late 50s, he went to work for WABJ, a small radio station in Michigan, after his program news director, which led to a job at WHIO AM-TV in Dayton, Ohio, where he honed his reporting skills, landing interviews with the likes of Jimmy Hoffa and LBJ, not LeBron James, but Lyndon Johnson, LBJ associate Billy Celestis. He also hosted a daily 90-minute radio talk show called Conversation Piece in 1963, where he attracted a large female audience. But he was frustrated in his efforts to land a job with national reach and quit broadcasting 4 years later to work as a salesman for E.F. McDonald, a trading stamp company in Dayton. Within a year, however, he was back to hosting a morning interview program on WLWD-TV in Dayton, The Phil Donahue Show. And from there on, it was only up from that point. I recall after his show ended in the mid-90s, he briefly hosted on MSNBC a political program. And I remember this political program. Let's see if I can find some information about this. Yeah, here we go. In 2000, 2003, Donahue briefly hosted Return to Television with a self-titled WNBC talk show in which he interviewed newsmakers on social and political issues. His audience was dwarfed by that of Fox News' The O'Reilly Factor, with which it competed, but drew the highest ratings of any show on the cable network at the time. However, the show was canceled after 6 months, leading some observers to conclude that the network felt the show unwelcome given the political climate prevailing in the country at the time. So the thing about it was supposedly canceled because of low ratings, but it was the highest rated program on MSNBC. Really what it was, you gotta remember, this is the Bush era. This is when the country was still primarily supportive of Bush, supportive of the Iraqi war. And it was seen as if his show was out of step with America. When in reality, I think if that show had debuted 4 years later, it would have been a staple on MSNBC. By that point in time, the tide had turned in this country. We were becoming a lot more activist and vocal in our opposition to government and our opposition. Because you remember, this is right after 9/11. So at that time, people who are younger, it was seen as almost a crime to criticize the government after 9/11 because everybody was just so united with Bush and they used that to great political effect, even though they shouldn't have done that. And I remember Keith Olbermann was really pissed off because he had a show later on. And I think he was influenced by Phil Donahue. For those who don't know, Phil Donahue was very, very liberal. Very, very liberal. This is what Variety TV said at the time. Network management apparently didn't care for the anchor's left-leaning politics, a contention that echoes a recently leaked internal memo that found Donahue's politics would not have been palatable to audiences in wartime. Now, see, this is when MSNBC wasn't as universally left-leaning. It was trying to be more fair. But over time, MSNBC began to cultivate an audience that was more left-leaning. So that's why I say Donahue would have been more in step had he been a little bit younger and had all these things happen 4 or 5 years later. But anyway, Donahue was inducted into the Academy of Television Arts and Science Hall of Fame in 1993 and won an ATAS Lifetime Achievement Award in 1996. He's survived by his wife, his second wife, Marlo Thomas, whom he married in 1980. Marlo Thomas is the daughter of television superstar Danny Thomas. For those of you who are too young, he had a very popular show that aired in the 50s and 60s called, first was called the Danny Thomas Show. Then I think it was renamed in the 50s, sometime in the mid-50s, renamed Make Room for Daddy. And he had a brief revival of that show in the early 70s called Make Room for Granddaddy. But he was a longtime comic. I think he died in February of 91, if memory serves me correctly. And he died just days after filming a commercial for, what is that cancer center that St. Joe's, I think it's called, St. Jude's. His daughter is a spokesperson for that and took up the mantle after he passed away. Anyway, Phil Donahue passes away at the age of 88. May he rest in peace.